glory days at the stick. From who's got it better than us to brick by brick. It's always the 49ers way, from off-season to game day. Yeah, we talk back. It's the 49ers Cutback.
It's 49ers Cutback podcast time. Welcome to the show, everyone. I'm excited about this one. Even though there's some interesting news, maybe some bad news, it's always fun to talk San Francisco 49ers football. And we're going to be talking a little bit about Drake Jackson today because Drake Jackson's season has come to an end. Drake Jackson put on the IR and officially ends his season. So no more to Drake Jackson's potential this season. And I know that's going to make a lot of people feel somewhat negative and somewhat bad. But I think this is one of those things where the 49ers now can move forward. The question marks have been answered about who Drake Jackson will be this season. And the fact is he won't be out there producing, and the 49ers are going to have to find a player to get out there and produce. What's up, Josh? Josh in the chat says hashtag TCC. What's up, Ant? And what's up to Josh? What's up to Darmillion in the chat says, what's up? How's it going? And he's right. We do have a lot of injuries piling up. And with those injuries, we have some changes to the roster. We're going to be getting into those as well. But the effect of Drake Jackson is going to be felt initially in the first part of the preseason because he would normally be getting reps. And we've been asking the question, who's going to be the fourth member of that defensive end rotation? Well, now we're really sure it's not going to be Drake Jackson. There was always the thought that maybe he would come back. He would be on the PUP list to start the season and then eventually be ready to come back after 4 to 8 games, depending on how well the knee healed from the surgery in the offseason. And now he's just not going to be coming back. The 49ers had to make room to sign another player, and they chose to end Drake Jackson's season, which means there were question marks already about how quickly that knee was going to be healthy and ready to go. So it's the end of an era potentially for Drake Jackson. We'll see. Maybe next year he comes back and he has a shot to come out there and potentially, get back, re-engage with this roster. But the 49ers have made some corresponding roster moves. And right before I came on air, I actually just saw this come through from Tom Pelissero as the 49ers have signed defensive end Jonathan Garvin to a 1-year deal. Garvin has been with the Packers from 2020 to 2022, and he was with the Birmingham Stallions in the UFL this last season. So 49ers bring in a defensive end, and this is, of course, a guy that needs to help the 49ers early on in the preseason. So his time potentially gets started while Drake Jackson's potentially comes to an end. Please like and subscribe to the channel if you haven't already. If you're listening audio platform 49ers Cutback on Believe, please give it a 5-star rating. And if you're going to bet with Bet Online. Bet Online is the world's most trusted betting platform and your number one source for everything online sports betting. Right now, you can receive 50% free bet of up to $250 on your first deposit to bet on anything from the Olympics to baseball to Formula One racing. Bet Online is every stat, every matchup, and even live odds and spreads while the games are being played. When the game's over, head on over to our online casino and get in on a game of blackjack or poker or unwind with one of our over 150 slot games. Head to the website today to get in on the action. Use the promo code BELIEVE, that's BLEAV, for your 50% free bet credit on your first deposit up to $250. Bet Online, the game starts here. So that was the first news. Drake Jackson, is going to be done for the season, and the 49ers are going to potentially have to come up with a better option. And right away, people started looking at the things that are going on with Brandon Ayuk and saying, hey, maybe the 49ers do want Alex Highsmith or Nick Herbig as part of that deal. So defensive end and signing a defensive end, it seems like the 49ers have at least found the answer in the short term, getting Garvin and bringing him in. But now they'll look to potentially make another move. A lot of times you like to carry 5 defensive ends. Do they think Austin Bryant is the answer? I think that's going to be determined. And what's up, Lulu's in the house is high, Ant. Love your takes. Keep it going. I really appreciate that. Bobby says, I wonder if Drake was healthy, if he would have taken a step up from last year. Yeah, you know what? I would like to think he would. And, it's tough because Drake Jackson's injury from last season is now carrying over, and he's just going to lose an entire year. He lost half the year last year. He loses an entire year this year. That's never what you want in the middle of your career. So it's tough. Drake Jackson's not going to have the opportunity to get better in practice, and he's not going to have the opportunity to go and prove that he had gotten better from last season. So it's going to be tough. No more Drake Jackson. And now we're going to be talking about some of the other opportunities that the 49ers are going to have. So it's going to be fun. And I do like that we keep, continuing to see the 49ers have to make moves and bring guys in. And Mark says, hey, they should just cut Drake. Well, I mean, they have roster control. He's pretty cheap. So I don't think they're going to cut him. They'll just, right now, they had to clear a roster spot. They did that. But I think this will be something that's looked at during the offseason. And next year, Drake Jackson, that will be his 4th year in the league. And we just haven't seen, him live up to expectations of what they thought that he was going to be when he was a 2nd-round pick coming out of USC. So it's pretty interesting. And, now the 49ers, because of that, they did sign Tracy Walker. Tracy Walker, Josh, bringing it up here in chat, was the move that was announced with Drake Jackson going on IR. And Tracy Walker is a safety that the 49ers are getting with 43 career starts. He comes over. Has been with the Detroit Lions, and he comes to San Francisco now. And Eric Harris was released the other day with Tariq Owens. Both of them released at the same time. Tariq waived. And so Eric Harris, potentially, don't know. I haven't heard if there was an injury that caused him to be cut, but the 49ers brought in 3 safeties for a workout yesterday, including Tracy Walker, and the 49ers signed Tracy Walker to a new contract. So Tracy Walker is now on the San Francisco 49ers. He was at practice today wearing number 35 and participating, and it's an interesting one because we've been talking about the 49ers safety depth since the 49ers first got into training camp because of some of the questions about guys like Talanoa Hufanga. When was Talanoa Hufanga going to be ready for the season? And Hufanga right now is still on pace, according to the 49ers, to be ready for week 1. So we didn't think there really needed to be an adjustment. In fact, when Matt Mayoko joined me and Mark on the Red and Bold show to talk about the safety position, he mentioned Eric Harris as a potential candidate to get some snaps behind George Odom as they looked for who was going to be that 4th safety. Well, now Tracy Walker comes in, and he's got a lot of ability, and he's got a lot of experience. So the 49ers have some guys now. Does that mean Talanoa Hufanga is not going to be ready for week 1? I don't think that's the case. I think what this means is that the 49ers are making sure they have the depth that they need for the preseason and to get through it. And Tracy Walker, though, could potentially earn himself a spot. It was just a few years ago that Tashaun Gibson signed with the 49ers towards the end of preseason and then ended up playing in week 1 off the practice squad, eventually was elevated and became a key member of the San Francisco 49ers 2022 roster. So I think it's always interesting to see who's going to be camp bodies and who could be more. I think Tracy Walker could be more. We'll see how this thing pans out, but I think he is an improvement over other guys like Taylor Hawkins, like Eric Harris. So you've got some potential there, especially if you're maybe a little bit nervous that Hufanga wouldn't be ready. But so far, we haven't heard or seen anything that would say Hufanga isn't going to be ready. Lou says, Ant, any thoughts on trying to trade for an O-lineman? If it's the Steelers, how about Frazier and a pick? I'd rather keep BA. It's pretty messy currently. Yeah, I think everyone would rather keep Brandon Ayuk, and there's a multitude of different scenarios that are out there. What the compensation look like from the Steelers to potentially make this Brandon Ayuk trade work? We know they haven't been willing to potentially add in Pat Freiermuth or George Pickens, and the 49ers are seeking a wide receiver back in return. At least that was what was reported today. So, I mean, potentially they could think about going offensive line. Zach Frazier would make sense. A guy like Troy Fatanu, who they drafted, with the overall 20th pick. But I don't think the Steelers are really willing to bend. I think they're trying to make the 49ers bend on this. And the 49ers are trying to get enough draft capital and or players back to help their team for 2024. So I don't know if an offensive lineman would be the case. And I don't know if Zach Frazier would be the player either, for the mere fact that 49ers normally don't go like going young with center. They'll go young with other positions. We've seen it at guard, but they don't really like young offensive linemen at center. Even John Feliciano took a full year to get the center calls down. It's a very tough place, to play as a rookie. So they've got some things that they've got to get done there. That is for sure. Let's see. We got right here, moving fast here in chat. So thank you guys all for being in chat. Marvin, how's it going, Marvin? Always good when Marvin comes through. Says Steelers seem to think that just because Ayuk wants to play there, that the Niners will take their scraps. Yeah, I mean, you always want to try to give up the least amount possible and still come away with the player. And they think that they've got some leverage. Now, we know the 49ers kind of said no to them, and then they came back to the table. That means a willingness to at least give more. But what does that look like? Because this is one of the real problems with the 49ers trading Brandon Ayuk to the Pittsburgh Steelers. If you look at the Steelers roster, you don't see that wide receiver that you want back that fits your system that can make plays at the level that Brandon Ayuk does. And so you have to have a third party or another type of trade that gets you that guy back. And of course, I talked about this a little bit earlier in the week, that maybe the 49ers would try to take picks in a deal for Ayuk and take that and trade it for another player. And that's what's being discussed now. Multiple national media pundits have picked up on it and tried to say this is something that could come. But right now, Brandon Ayuk's agent said, and he reported it to Graziano from the NFL Network, that there's no framework in place. There's no real conversations about a contract, at least that have happened. So this thing is a little bit further away, and it still gives the opportunity for the 49ers to work out an extension with Brandon Ayuk, which I think a lot of people are starting to like to hear, is the possibility of maybe Ayuk would just come back. And I think this from Josh is true. The Steelers just don't want to include a player. They want it to all be draft picks. And if this was in April before the draft, that would make a lot of sense. But I don't think that makes a lot of sense at all. And what's up to my guy, Tommy? How's it going? Tommy in chat, always good when you come through. How's it going? And so, just like Marvin said right here, the Niners don't have to bend. They can stay put and just make BA play under the current contract. You're 100% accurate. The fifth-year option is still an option for the 49ers. I mean, if you can find an opportunity to use Brandon Ayuk as an asset to get better, to get a player potentially and a pick from Pittsburgh, and you trade him there, then you could turn around and pick up another player that you feel could give you similar or better results than Brandon Ayuk, then that's a potential avenue you could go down. But right now, with the potential compensation coming back in the San Francisco trades, there would have to be another move to make it seem as if the 49ers get the better of the deal. Right now, the deals that have been presented or outlined by media members don't look like the 49ers should make them. And in fact, the 49ers should stick to making Brandon Ayuk play on his fifth-year option and then try to work out a trade next year after they franchise tag him. So right now, you're right. They don't have to do anything. They can kind of just sit back and hang out. And what's going on, Rick? How's it going? Says, hey, my friend, why are the 49ers players, some of them, starting to get hurt here? And this is annoying. It's always something that affects the San Francisco 49ers in training camp, but it affects all teams. You just heard about Rondale Moore going down with the Atlanta Falcons. Unfortunately, injuries happen in training camp as players are looking to get reacclimated to football. But just playing football, it's dangerous. And so you can have all kinds of soft tissue injuries. The thing I will say about the 49ers is, besides Drake Jackson, they haven't lost anyone for the season. And that's exactly what you're trying to accomplish, is not losing anyone long-term. Short-term, soft tissue injuries are to be expected, and you kind of manage those. So it's never fun to hear, but remember, this is kind of the norm when you're talking about what happens with the players, and injuries. And it's making it a little bit more difficult because you have guys like Brandon Ayuk that's holding in. You have a guy like Trent Williams that's holding out. And when you have guys with these soft tissue injuries, you have to keep bringing in more players to get those reps. Now they'll kind of start calming it down just a little bit with how intense practice is. And so maybe it'll work in. But the 49ers also not just signed Tracy Walker, the safety, but also signed the wide receiver Robbie Chosen Anderson. Of course, yesterday I was at training camp and I got video of him in his tryout. And so Robbie Anderson is going to be playing for the 49ers, at least during the preseason. The 49ers have 14 wide receivers under contract. A lot of those guys are dealing with things as far as little hamstring injuries or shoulder injuries, things that could possibly make them not be able to get out there and play. So it's something that the 49ers definitely are concerned about, especially when you look at the wide receivers that were out and didn't practice today. Danny Gray, of course, Ayuk holding in, Ricky Pearsall dealing with the shoulder. Chris Conley was nicked up yesterday after he made a 50-yard pass play. He did come back in practice, but they gave him the day off today. They're probably hoping he'll be ready to go for Saturday. But there have a lot of guys who have been out. Jacob Cowing just got back. Tay Martin just got back. So definitely injuries have been an issue for the 49ers, especially at wide receiver. And that's not even including guys like Malik Turner that they signed off the street, came in, and then he got hurt. They reached this injury settlement with him now. The 49ers have been dealing with injuries, especially at wide receiver, and it's been a little bit of an issue. Marvin says Ayuk is one of the best receivers in the game. Of course, the front office wants him. Absolutely. If this brought both sides to the table, the fact that he couldn't work out something with another team and the 49ers couldn't work out compensation for Brandon Ayuk and both sides come back to the table and work something out, I don't think anyone's upset about it. Brandon Ayuk is happy to stay in San Francisco and get paid. The 49ers are happy to have their number one wide receiver out there making plays for this football team. I think that would be nice for the players inside the locker room who all want him back as well. And so, I don't think it's a real bad situation for the 49ers to have talks again. But some of the reports are the 49ers and Brandon Ayuk haven't had very many talks recently. And so with that being said, they're looking for other avenues to either get something done where they can get a player in or potentially get Brandon Ayuk back to the table. And so we'll see what happens. It's never a fun situation to go through these contract negotiations. As Debo and others have said, you start to take it personally. And I think we've seen some of that come from the Brandon Ayuk camp. But right now, he's sitting pat. He's still going to team meetings. He's still a part of the 49ers. And until something's agreed upon, that's how it's going to be. So, I think that you want Brandon Ayuk there if you can keep him. And here's a good question right here from Dermillion. What happens if we get to the first game and Ayuk doesn't have a deal? Then he's going to play or he's going to sit out and lose a paycheck. So that's why people are saying, why don't the 49ers just let him play on the 5th-year option? Because Brandon Ayuk's hold in revealed the fact that he doesn't want to get fined. If he held out the way CeeDee Lamb did, then that's a different story. But when you hold in, you're showing a little bit of weakness as far as you don't want to get fined. And so in negotiation process, the 49ers know that. So when they get to week one of the regular season, Brandon Ayuk will have to decide to play or to forfeit a $1 million check or close to $1 million because he's going to be playing for $14 million this season. So if Ayuk is willing to give up the check, then the 49ers will be without Brandon Ayuk week 1 if no deal is done or no trade has been consummated. So I don't think that's a likelihood. I think when push came to shove, when they get about a week or two from the regular season, Brandon Ayuk would break and he would come back to practice, and the 49ers would have Brandon Ayuk playing on his 5th-year option because I don't think he wants to get fined, and the 49ers don't want to make a bad deal. You don't want to trade away one of your best young assets and not get something in return that's going to help you win a Super Bowl in 2024. So to me, if it came down to it, Ayuk would be playing and would be back. Al the Butcher says the player the Niners just signed us is from the UFL. Yes, that is correct. So he did sign the defensive end that they just signed, came from the UFL. He played for the Stallions. So he was from the Birmingham Stallions. That's Jonathan Garvin. He signed for a 1-year deal. He spent 2020 and 2022 through 2022 with the Packers. So, a UFL guy. They also signed Jontre Kirkland, wide receiver, the other day, and he also came from the UFL where he played for the Houston Roughnecks and others. So the 49ers and other teams have signed guys who are from the UFL. In fact, the 49ers had brought in Breeland Speaks, who was the number 1 guy as far as sacks. They brought him in for a workout earlier in the week. Well, today he signed somewhere else. So they potentially did not get Breeland Speaks. Maybe they wanted him, but UFL players are signing around the league, which means proof of concept. It's working for the teams. Marvin says, correct me if I'm wrong here, but if Ayuk does not suit up for the game on Saturday, he gets fined. Correct. That is true. He can get fined if he's supposed to be active and available for the game. It's not a fine like he would get into the regular season, but you are correct. That would happen, and he would get fined. Mark says, can other players defer their contract to get Ayuk signed? Well, I mean, players could always go in and rework deals if they have the ability to do so. But I don't believe that any of these players want to give up their money. They understand, they appreciate what Brandon Ayuk is going through, and they want Brandon Ayuk to get paid, and they want Brandon Ayuk on this team. But they also don't want to have to give up any change to make it happen. And it's not like Brandon Ayuk, if the reports are correct, is just wanting money. He's wanting a perfect circumstance. And I think his perfect circumstance is the 49ers paying him the money that he feels he deserves, because New England offered upwards of $32 million per season. And I don't blame him for not wanting to go to New England, but I think it does signal that he doesn't really want to play for just money. He wants to be in a situation where he feels comfortable, that he feels he can win. And right now, of course, the best situation is San Francisco, but they're not willing to pony up that money. And so I think that is a issue. And I don't think any of the other players are going to come to the rescue to help out Brandon Ayuk, even though guys like Trent Williams are still trying to get paid as well. So it's interesting. It's interesting to see. Marvin says, why the heck would they do that? It's not their fault that BA does not want to sign. I think these guys all know they're individual entities when it comes to business. And so they're all trying to get the most money they could possibly get. Of course, they want to be on a winning roster, but they leave that up to John and Kyle. That's John and Kyle's job to make sure they can fit everyone under the salary cap. And it's the player's job to make sure that they get as much money as they can. It's got to be about them. Josh says 49ers will not trade Ayuk to a contender. I think that's the case. I mean, why would you? I think, 49ers have got to be careful about who they trade Ayuk to in general. I think they'd love to send him to the AFC, but only if they could get the draft compensation that they're looking for, but also player compensation. They're a win now football team. Draft picks next year don't help this team. So they can be somewhat choosy with who they want him trade him to. And if it doesn't work out, they can't find that trade partner, whether Ayuk doesn't accept the deal or they can't figure it out. Well, they're not really worried about it because they've got control of Brandon Ayuk under his 5th-year contract. And I don't think there's a likelihood of him sitting out and losing all that money when this is going to be his biggest payday of his entire career. So eventually you're going to come where the rubber meets the road and they figure this thing out. And so right now, Brandon Ayuk is still trying to decide. And while that happens, and while you have things going on with Brandon Ayuk, and while you have things going on with Trent Williams and some of the injuries, the 49ers are trying to put together a roster that can make it through the preseason and then potentially hold over and get into the regular season. That's why you're seeing them sign, guys and bring them in, a Tracy Walker at safety or a Robbie Chosen Anderson at wide receiver. And we're probably going to see Robbie Anderson play on Saturday, I'm sure, because they need guys. They need guys that can come out there and play on Saturday. And they had to add some wide receivers. They've been missing some guys. They might even have to sign a punter before Saturday. Mitch Wisnowski has been dealing with a leg issue, has been dealing with a knee irritation, which means he's not going to be available. So 49ers either have to sign a punter for Saturday or go for it on 4th down every time. So we're probably going to see another roster move come up pretty soon, probably a couple more, as we just seen them sign a defensive end. They're going to have to make some more moves to potentially get some stuff done today. And with practice today, we saw some of the units that are probably going to start the game. At linebacker, we're probably going to see Campbell, Winters, and Curtis Robinson, with Curtis Robinson playing Mike. I think that'll be the starting linebacker group. Renardo Green and Rock Ya-Sin are going to play the starting corners on the outside. And then when they go to nickel, Ambry Thomas is going to come in. So these are some of the things we found out from practice today as far as the rotation. And we're not going to see a lot of starters, but we're going to see some starters this week. But a bright spot coming, and whenever you need a bright spot, Drake Jackson being out for the year. How about Robert Beal Jr. Coming out and having an excellent practice today? And I feel like he's been building over the last week or so in the days that I was out at training camp, just watching his technique, watching his get off, watching his ability. So at least we got that, where we got Robert Beal potentially stepping up and starting to make some plays. Mark says, Ant, do you think that if they just got picks, that this team isn't good enough to get the Super Bowl? Well, I think it's one of the deepest rosters in the NFL. That is for sure. I think it would make it difficult. I don't know if it would stop them ultimately from winning or from getting back to the Super Bowl, because I've seen George Kittle and Deebo Samuel overtake games. But I think offensively they would be missing one position of strength that they don't usually miss. So they'd be missing that X receiver, and so I think it would make it more difficult. I would say that they wouldn't be as good as last year. And we know that they needed every one of their cast of characters to get to the Super Bowl. So I think that would make it more difficult. So I wouldn't say that they don't have enough, but I think it would be more difficult without Brandon Ayuk. That is for sure. And I do think they would take a step back at the wide receiver position, because I don't know when Ricky Pearsall is going to be up to that level as far as ready to go out and get a lot of snaps. And I think you're missing something at X. I think X is a weakness for the 49ers behind Brandon Ayuk. We just haven't seen Danny Gray do it consistently. It's not Ronnie Bell's best position. Chris Conley has moments where he looks like he's pretty good, but he's been a journeyman. He's not an all-pro caliber wide receiver like Ayuk. So minus them trading Ayuk and getting another respectable X receiver, whether that would be Amari Cooper or Devontae Adams, and Devontae Adams would be a huge pickup. But besides something like that happening, I think a trade of Brandon Ayuk hurts this football team on the offensive side of the ball. So that's one of those things I really, really worry about it. So it's tough. And Josh says Beal is my guy. Yeah, and he's looking pretty good, Josh. I've been impressed with him. He gets better every single day. I think he's getting more comfortable within this 49ers defense, playing with better leverage against the run. And he's got some skills there. I think he's still working on it. He's not there yet, but he's definitely got the ability to do so. Marvin says, so is Ambry Thomas going to make this team? I don't think so. I haven't changed my mind on this from what I believed before training camp started. I think his play is inconsistent at best. I think that if injuries pile up, there's a chance. But I think right now, this 49ers football team is Charvarius Ward, Deommodore Lenoir, Isaac Yiadom, Renardo Green, those four guys locked at the top of the cornerback room. If you're keeping five, this is where it gets difficult. I think Rock Ya-Sin's played the next best at cornerback. And then we've had injury with Darrell Luter Jr. And so I think that I would put Ambry Thomas right there with Darrell Luter Jr. behind Rock Ya-Sin. And I just don't think he can overtake him. But an injury or an opportunity like that could put Ambry on the team. Here's Ambry Thomas's obstacle besides playing corner. Number one, he only plays outside corner. There's no versatility there. So that pigeonholes him a little bit. Number two, he doesn't play special teams very well. That also hurts his chances, where Darrell Luter Jr. is younger. The 49ers have more contract control, and he plays special teams. So if you have to make a decision, you might go with the younger guy, especially if you don't feel like they're going to have to play a lot of snaps early on. But Ambry Thomas is going to get a shot in the preseason because the 49ers are dealing with injuries. Yedom's been hurt. They're not going to play Lenoir. They're not going to play Charvarius Ward. So we're going to see the young guy, Renardo Green. We're going to see Rock Ya-Sin. And I just found out it's Rock Ya-Sin, not Rock Ya-Sin, thanks to the communications department for the 49ers. But there's a lot of things that still have to go the right way for Ambry Thomas to make this roster. I think him and Sam Womack right now are on the outside looking in. Al asked, anyone know why Purdy's knee is taped up? Yeah, I do know that that's kinesio tape. A lot of times they'll use that, especially if there's any sort of inflammation, things like that. So it could just be something that's a little bit, annoying him or bugging him right now. But I did notice that as well in one of the highlights. And Josh says he banged the knee, I think, which would definitely make a lot of sense for sure to hear that. Let's see. What's up? The Destroyer says, finally getting on one of your live feeds. Yeah, glad you could make it. I'm going to be adding some more live feeds. We'll be talking about that in the upcoming weeks. There's going to be, more with me working with other people as well. So I'm looking forward to it. And I'm always glad when you guys can come through and join in on the chat. It's a lot of fun to hear what you guys have to say. Kenny says, Ambry and Bell to Chargers for something, anything. The Ambry Thomas is probably not going to get traded. If he played well in the preseason, maybe they could work something out. But right now, they're going to need him for sure in the preseason with some of the injuries and some of the concerns that they've had on this roster. And we're going to see. We're going to see what this back end of the 49ers secondary looks like, because they're going to get a lot of time to play. We're going to see a lot of these guys We're going to see a lot of Malik Mustafa. He's going to be a lot of fun as well. So I think that it's exciting to see what's going to happen in the preseason. There's some players that are still battling for roster spots. And, I think that's one of the things that's the funnest about the preseason that I love is seeing those back end guys who come out and compete. And maybe you've seen them do a little something at training camp and then they come in and they step up and they make another play. And it's like, oh man, maybe these guys got a shot. So Lou says, I would have thought the Chargers would inquire about BA given the wide receivers they lost. That's Harbaugh. I mean, Harbaugh, if you really think about it, he doesn't ever have really strong wide receiver rooms. You go back and look at the 49ers when he was here and they were going through guys. But you never, besides Crabtree, we never really had that guy that was a number 1 or number 2 caliber wide receiver. They brought in Moss at the end of his career, but wide receiver wasn't something that Harbaugh's ever had on these teams. I don't think he values it as much as he does with all the running backs that he brought in. So, yeah, they have not been interested in the BA, or at least maybe they called and they didn't like what the 49ers had said. Josh says, how is the tight end room looking? It's looking like a lot of competition. I think one thing that's been interesting is Logan Thomas has been dealing with the hamstring. So he's kind of been put on the back burner. So no Logan Thomas is part of this mix. And right now, to me, it looks like it's George Kittle and there's Eric Saubert. That's the 1-2. And then after that, it's Braden Willis. Those are the top 3 guys. And then it goes Cameron Latu and Jake Tongas. I think those guys are next up in the battle. So I think Tongas has looked good. I think Cameron Latu's got a lot to prove during the preseason to make this roster. I think it's going to be difficult. You see the flashes every once in a while where you see him get open, sit down in his zone, catch the ball occasionally. But he's not very active or effective right now in training camp. We'll see if it translates into preseason. Maybe he'll make some plays and get people's attention. But right now, I would say Saubert is pretty much in control of tight end 2, especially with no Logan Thomas there to challenge him at the position. So tight ends, though, good tight ends, guys who are battling and making plays. So it's fun to watch. And Josh says they're getting Schrader ready for preseason game. Yeah, Schrader, he's been fun. I think that one thing I would say about Schrader is he's a guy that consistently makes the right read. I think there's a little bit of lack of explosiveness that make it a little bit difficult sometimes for him to get the extra yardage or to potentially get a whole shot play. He doesn't look as fast when it comes to getting the edges in the outside zone or the toss play outside. Those times linebackers a lot of times run him down. But when he runs in the inside and he can find the hole, he finds little nooks and crannies and gets himself through the line of scrimmage. He does a good job with that. But I wonder how many of the big plays we're going to get. You can really notice the difference in speed from him and McCaffrey, him and Mitchell, even him and Mason. You just see it significantly. But I'm excited to see him run because I think that's what he should. Get a lot of play in the preseason and just see what he can do. Kenny says, should rookies ever get first-team reps? Sure. And rookies do get first-team reps. The 49ers have been using Dominic Pooney at right guard. He's been getting first-team reps. They rotate their wide receivers through, so they get first-team reps all the time. You'll see Ricky Pearsall working with the ones or Jacob Cowing. And so we've seen a lot of guys like that work with the ones and get some extra reps. Ronaldo Green's work with the ones. So, yeah, I think it's important sometimes to work your rookies in, especially if you're going to count on those rookies to make plays during the season. So I always think it's a good one. Tommy, not a fan of Cameron Latu. And I think a lot of people feel that way. I think Cameron Latu, if you look at what he did last year in preseason and training camp to what he's done this year in training camp, it's improved so much from last year, but we're still not seeing the plays, right? And until people see him making catches and having plays that equal positive results, they're not going to be very high on Cameron Latu. And that's okay. Latu's got to be the one to prove it. Nobody can go out there and prove it for him, and he hasn't showed it consistently that he can make a lot of plays. Lou says Saubert is pretty slow, isn't he? He looks a lot like Charlie Warner and Ross Dwelly. That's the best way I can explain it. Is he blocks like Warner and catches the ball like Dwelly, and he's built a lot like Dwelly. He's not fast. I wouldn't call him like slow, but he's definitely more of a lumber when he gets the football. But if you just think of Ross Dwelly, that's about what you're going to expect from Saubert as far as athleticism. But he makes some of those plays, and right now that's what he's doing pretty good. Lou says thoughts on the Green Bay running back we got. Well, I liked him a lot, but he hasn't practiced the last few days. And so I don't know exactly what happened. He was looking pretty good. He's a special teams player for sure, but he's struggled. And I think that's an issue. Struggled to be on the field the last couple of days, and that's an issue. They've had to go out and sign a couple of guys. And so Keyshawn Vaughn came in. They signed him. They also brought in Matt Breida. So I don't know how much we're going to get of these other guys that are dealing with injuries, and we'll see. I mean, they haven't cut him. They haven't come to any agreement with him moving on. So likelihood is he's going to come back at some point. So we'll see. Hopefully he does come back. So I want to see full competition at all these positions. Kenny says, will Pooney eventually line up at left guard this season? I don't think so. I think that's why they like John Feliciano. He has the ability to play both. And so if something happened to Aaron Banks, they would just go with John Feliciano. I think that right now Dominic Pooney's put himself in contention for the starting right guard job. I think Coach Chris Forster has all the purpose in the world of allowing Spencer Burford to come back and compete with Dominic Pooney when Burford's ready. And I don't think that competition is over. But Dominic Pooney's put himself firmly in the middle of that competition, and he's done a very good job. The things that Dominic Pooney looked good at in college last year in the Senior Bowl was his lateral movement and his anchor in pass protection, and he shows that every single day at practice. The things that Dominic Pooney has to get better at still are run blocking. That's something that we've seen other guys get better at. So Pooney, if he can figure out the run blocking, there's a chance he never lets go of the starting job and he just starts at guard. If he can't, then Spencer Burford's probably going to start at right guard. I think that's still a battle that's going on, and Pooney's play during the preseason is going to tip this thing one way or the other. So Lou says Willis should make the 53. I think right now he's positioned to make the 53 out of the tight end room. He's just been consistent. He plays a little bit of fullback when they have Kyle Juszczyk out. Of course, Jake Tungus does the same thing, but there's some versatility there. It's normal. Kenny says we've signed a bunch of wide receivers recently. That a concern? Injury-wise, yes. They've dealt with a lot, and even guys they brought in, guys like Malik Turner suffered an injury. So you're right. I mean, I think it's a concern. They continue to bring in guys that compete and play. The one thing that matters is when you get to the regular season that everyone's healthy. And right now, when you look at the roster, I know Ayuk's holding in, but after that, Debo's healthy for the most part. Chris Conley, I know he got nicked up, but he's been staying healthy for the most part. Those are some of your top end guys. Jawan Jennings is healthy. He had an ankle for one day, but he came back. So as long as those guys stay healthy, I think they're going to be okay. The key is ramping this thing up. So when you get to week 1, you're full go and ready to go. And I think that right now, preseason injury, you just can't potentially worry about those too much yet. If they were season ending, then you have some concern about it. And yes, the 100% correct, Logan. They have signed Jonathan Garvin to replace Drake Jackson as a depth rotational piece. As Josh said earlier, more than likely, he will probably just be a camp body. But they've also had an injury at defensive end to Sam Okawanu. So I don't know what Okawanu's status is, but he's missed a few days of practice as well. So yeah, they got some guys that are still looking to get more opportunities, and this is a chance. But yeah, Drake Jackson being out, Garvin comes in, and he's going to add some depth along the defensive end. What's up, Derek? How's it going? Says, if you had to choose one or more issues you want to see develop in the O-line from previous seasons, what would it be? I would say that, number one, I want to see less pressure from the middle. Jake Brendel, Aaron Banks, and whoever plays right guard, whether that's Dominic Pooney or John Feliciano, whoever it is, I want to see less push from that interior offensive line. I want to see them anchor better. That's why I was really excited about Dominic Pooney coming out of college, because he anchors so well. Banks can normally anchor pretty good, but that's not a strength of Jake Brendel. It hasn't been a strength of Spencer Burford. And so we need those guys to do that so Brock Purdy can feel comfortable in the pocket and be able to step up when needed. So I think that's one of the main things I want to see them get better at. I don't know if Jake Brendel could get a lot better at that, but I do know the other guys can. The key is, though, you still have to be good at running the ball. If you're good at running the football, that will make it third and short, and then those guys don't have to hold their blocks as long. So I would say that is probably the key, is that interior pressure is probably the main thing. But that was a great question. And that's what Josh said right here. Brendel still can't anchor. And that's why I actually liked, some of the other guys. I thought Nick Zakel did a pretty good job the other day. And I've heard, people talk, about Zakel in a negative way, but he's had some good reps and he's looked a lot better. I think he's actually put himself in the mix. I don't think I'm not saying for sure he's going to make the team, but he's been in the mix. And so I think that's something that's really good. Right here, Kenny says, Pooney anchors well. Grant said today, yeah, Pooney has anchored well for his whole entire career. If you go back and you watch any of the draft coverage, everyone was talking about Dominic Pooney's anchoring ability. The guy does a good job. That's one of his strong suits. It's the run blocking. That is the biggest concern for him. So 49ers had to make some moves. Drake Jackson is done for the season. Robbie Chosen Anderson has been signed. Tracy Walker, the safety, has been brought in. He's going to be helping this football team as well. So 49ers making some moves and getting some things done. I'm going to check out. I'll catch you guys on the next one. Until then, stay safe. And remember, the right way is always the 49ers way.